You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. My guest today is none other than Amir Pasik, the Eugene R. Temple Dean of the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. I will say that this institution is the world's first school devoted to research and teaching about philanthropy. Amir, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Art, it's my pleasure to be with you and the Heart of Giving podcast is such an important voice in our field. I'm honored to be part of it.
Well, Amir, I've been wanting to get you on this program for some time so that we could talk about the work we're doing together at the Lilly Family School, focused on getting the Phil D program off the ground. That's right, the Doctors of Philanthropic Leadership program. And I wanted to get you on, obviously, to talk about that. But I also wanted to find out more about what's going on at the Lilly School in general. People will be amazed by everything going on there. And I wanted to talk about your background some. So to get us started, let's find out about how you got to academia and how your winding career, which was mostly academics, led you to this particular role.
Oh, academia. Well, I think it was curiosity. I think curiosity about the world. I grew up as a third culture kid. My parents were from the former Yugoslavia, and I grew up in American schools in Iran before the revolution. And so the way societies change, the way there's turmoil and conflict and peace and all those issues were what drove my curiosity. So that's why I went into academia. My original degrees were in the social sciences culminating in international relations. I was very interested to understand what moves society, what makes for stability and conflict. And so those were some of the things that I studied as an academic and that began my trajectory.
You know, I'm always fascinated when I ask that question, how people have decided to take on such large things in their careers. And you are right up there with them to choose something that would obviously change the world in a big way, but is hard to achieve. So how did this lead you to academia, though?
Academia was one of the paths. I tried a couple of different things, working in what is called the real world, but I kept coming to the world of ideas because I was curious to understand, well, this is how things work in practice, but why is it that we got to this place where we're using these standard operating procedures? Why do we have the institutions that we have? Why do we have the policies that we have? Thinking that you really need to understand what's behind it if you want to really make a bigger impact. So the few times that, over my career, that even before I did my doctorate, I worked in business a little bit. I worked in higher education more practically. I would come back to the world of ideas because that curiosity always drove me to come back and ask the why questions.
Well, when we look at the world today, we certainly see a lot of conflict, and we need people focused on that. Given everything that you see now, though, what do we have to be hopeful about?
That's a great question because we shouldn't be just blindly Pollyannish that the world will be better. So as you asked me that question, Art, I was thinking about a convocation, the beginning of an academic year when I was a postdoctoral fellow at Brown University, and Vartan Gregorian, who some of your listeners who are in the philanthropic world will know as a longtime serving president of the Carnegie Corporation, one of our great legacy institutions. And he gave a wonderful talk, it must have been somewhere around 1995 or 1996, about the role of faith in education. We don't know. We don't know that what we're teaching our students is going to actually end up making a difference in the end. We don't know that the process of discovery will continue. But we have faith, and it's a faith in science and discovery and research and having the values that we think pursuing those why questions will bring more light and understanding to the world. I think we have good evidence that it has so far, that our process of discovering the principles and doing so also in a way that respects other people and invites other people into the process has done remarkable things in terms of things we've been able to innovate, both in terms of the sciences and in terms of the way we have arranged our societies. Just think about however flawed our founders were, they were also scholars in the process as well. So there is good grounding for the faith that we have in the power of discovery, but at the end of the day, it is a hope that is also based in faith. So it's a kind of a scientific faith that I think is what we share amongst ourselves in the academy these days.
Well, I never quite heard anyone use the phrase scientific faith, but when you think about it, that's what we kind of do in the nonprofit sector. You know, we start these organizations primarily based on faith. We don't have the money that we need or the resources or even in some cases, the skill sets to do the work that we're setting out to do. But we have faith, so to speak, that these things will come together. Over time, we inject science in much the same way that a scientist would. You know, you start out with a hypothesis, which is primarily based on faith. And then later on, you build in the testing and the rigor to make sure that the things you're doing can actually achieve the objectives that you set forth. So I like this phrase, scientific faith, to sort of describe what we're doing in the nonprofit sector. That leads me to another question, though, because our sector has been one that's sort of been lacking in the way of data, but that is certainly what the Lilly School of Philanthropy has been about. Why don't you talk about the science part and the data work that you all are doing at the Lilly School?
Yeah, that's a fundamentally important question, because we need to know the facts of the field of who is giving, where is it going, what are the overall magnitudes that we're talking about. And we're fortunate to be working on one particular study that many of your listeners are probably familiar with. It comes out every June. It's called Giving USA. It measures the total amount of giving in the United States, how much of it comes from individuals, corporations, foundations, and bequests, and then where it goes, faith, religion, education, health, international, social services as well. It's really the GDP of giving for our sector. And as you mentioned, we are data poor compared to the market or the government. You can think on a daily basis, we read reports about the status of our economy, labor market, inflation, the size of the government. Those activities are tracked with so much more granularity than what we are doing in our sector, which is an underappreciated part of our economy, not to mention part of our democracy and our political and our social fabric as well. So having the basic data about the context is vital. So we are so pleased that we do have the Giving USA data as well. We do a variety of other data gathering projects, and now that Giving USA has been established as a norm and something people look forward to. I think the next phase of development of data gathering in our field is going to that next level to get some more granularity in terms of what's happening within those subfields. So, for example, we're doing research on what's happening in different demographic sectors. We know that underrepresented communities, for example, have not been looked at as much, and we're looking at that. We're looking at how much money is going to women's and girls' causes, how much money is going into environmental issues. So that's the next trend, I think, is to looking into more granularity, what's happening under those big categories, because all of that contextual data is going to help people in those sectors to understand, where do I belong? How are the trends affecting what I'm trying to do? And then perhaps even further down the field, they'll be able to have more information to connect to others who are doing similar work. Because we know that one of the criticism of our sector is, why are there so many instances of a particular function all over the place? Why does one city have 17 different soup kitchens, for example? Well, part of it is because we are just so information poor, and people see the immediate need before them. They don't have the data to be able to connect with others so that they may be able to be a little bit more systematic. So the data gathering is vital, and we're going to that second level of granularity domestically. But as you also know, giving is a global phenomenon, and to understand ourselves, we also need to know what's happening in other countries. So we have these global philanthropy indices that also measure the conditions for doing philanthropy in 93 different economies around the world, and also the flow of philanthropy across borders. And that's something that I'm particularly interested in, because as you mentioned about my initial interest, it has to do with international relations, because at the end of the day, we have seen huge disruptions happen when we don't pay attention to international relations, even though we may not understand them or see them on a daily basis. Making sure that we don't have the big disruptions that we had in the previous century with the First and the Second World War, not to mention the Cold War as well. Philanthropy can play a very constructive role in terms of avoiding some of those things that are destructive of society as well. So that's just a quick overview of some of the data gathering that we think is important, and we are eager also to join. We have a variety of partners that we do it with, so I don't want to give the impression that we do this alone. This is really a collective effort within the sector. Many partners feed into Giving USA, from Candid to our corporate data provider, the Giving Institute, and then on the global philanthropy indices, we have a series of partners around the world. So it really is part of a collective effort that we need to continue to build on. And even your organization provides important data in terms of charities as well. So it is really part of a collective effort where we're all trying to improve the information that we have so we can better do our work, have more impact, and coordinate all of it so it's even more effective.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned collaboration, because obviously there are lots of groups that come together to provide the inputs that you need to produce the work that you do on giving every year. And, that's one of the things that I think our sector can do more. And it's great that you're providing that example. But let's also talk about some of the other work that you're doing at the Lilly School to educate the next generation of leaders.
Yes, so we have a range of educational programs serving people who are interested in making a contribution to society. And we provide something of a unique perspective because we put philanthropy first, and we think of philanthropy in a very expansive way as voluntary action for the public good, but even more broadly than that, because as you know, academics like to kind of make sure they get the concepts right. So that's something of a working definition. But we think about kindness to each other that is instinctive. We think about other ways communities help each other. One of the things we count, and we were talking about Giving USA, is money going to formal nonprofits, but that's a sliver of the way that humans help each other, and seeking to understand that helping instinct with individuals, the way we organize to help each other and improve society, is at the center of what we look at. So we built a curriculum with philanthropy first, realizing that there are important study programs that educate on philanthropy in schools of public policy, because sometimes people enter our sector by looking at public policy and then seeing that the nonprofit sector takes care of a lot of social services that in some countries are done by the government. And then also people go to business schools because there's a very useful market approach to what we do in terms of the nonprofit world as a business. And then the social enterprise kind of emerges from that as well. But what's distinctive about us is that we put philanthropy first, and that's also where our faculty is focused on from different disciplines studying philanthropy. And that's the primary lens through which we focus all of our programs. So we have a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, and we have this new program that you're so kindly involved in teaching, which is our latest, which is the Professional Doctorate in Philanthropic Leadership. They all serve different segments of the field, obviously. You know, there are students into the bachelor's program, and I think one can get a bachelor's degree in a variety of disciplines, and that will serve you well. We provide a particular pathway for people who are interested in that broad, what used to be called the liberal arts education, but ours also has a lot of practical career-based engagements that are internship focused, but also skills-based education on fundraising and grant making. And so we're serving those students who want a bachelor's experience where philanthropy figures very prominently. Perhaps they've already started a nonprofit in an undergraduate course. They have been involved in some kind of important family, faith, or other socially activist program that this is what they're motivated by, and we're providing them a pathway toward an excellent education through philanthropy. And then we have our master's programs, the bulk of which are offered online, which we find professionals who are already in the field. Perhaps they are already fundraisers, or they are working for a foundation or in the program area of a nonprofit, and they want to get to that next level in their profession and want to delve a little bit more deeply into some of the questions we started about. Where did this system come from, and how do I understand the underlying mechanics so that I can be even more effective? Sometimes if you only know the techniques of a particular craft, you just know that these are techniques, they've worked in this particular situation, but when situations change, you're not as adept at understanding how you can intervene if you didn't understand how it came to be in the first place. So that's our master's program. And then we have a PhD program that trains more academics for the academy. So our PhD students, we have a small PhD program, they study philanthropic issues at the frontiers of the field, everything from a fundraiser burnout to understanding community foundations and their dynamics in different countries. And our students are getting placed in major universities as major universities are increasingly interested across the fields, be it in schools of public policy or business schools or arts and sciences programs. They're increasingly interested in philanthropy. So that's quite an academic program. But over the years, we were also listening to senior leaders who already had degree programs. Maybe they had a JD or a master's or an MBA, and they were curious to share what they knew in a systematic way, or they had a particular problem in the leadership field or something related to collaboration that they were puzzling about and wanted to really go to the next level. They did not necessarily fit into a PhD because they weren't going to become academics. They weren't going to create new research. So that's when we started devising a new doctorate because we also wanted to preserve the wisdom that we know is there in practical leaders who have led our sector. Some of them are, and we all know, mentors who have made important strides, important innovations. And we want to be able to capture that wisdom, connect it to what the academy is doing in terms of systematic research, and allow these leaders to propose some kind of a solution to a problem in their organization, in their segment, or in their field. And what's important about that, in addition to, I think, the ability for these students to make an impact in the field by combining research and practice, which has been part of the DNA of the Lilly Family School from the beginning, is that we will also be capturing a lot of this wisdom, which I'm afraid gets lost because 20 years go by, some white papers or reports that a great leader had put together, they get lost because they're not part of any kind of a system of finding of academic libraries. One of the things we do in the academy well is categorize information and make it findable. And the academy still has a leg up, I think, on some of our tech friends who dominate the internet and social media. Just go outside of Wikipedia, which is still a nonprofit, if you remember. That was the leftover promise of a voluntary internet, and the internet was largely built by voluntary action. You go outside of that and you look for something that's over 3 or 4 or 5 years old, and you have a hard time trying to find it. So preventing reinventing the wheel and having an opportunity to have more cumulative knowledge at that intersection of research and practice. This is where the PhilD, I think, has, at least in the first 2 cohorts, and I hope you agree with me, Art, you've seen that we have some amazing leaders, and I think it's going to really help rectify this information and knowledge knowledge lack that we have had in the field.
Well, I'm really excited to be a part of the program. I'm going to be teaching a course on leadership cases. It gives me the opportunity to link practice with theory to help students build on their own leadership trajectory and also align new leadership understandings with their applied research project. And I mention applied research project as a distinction between that and a dissertation. And because our school is based on theory and practice, students are writing applied research projects. Talk about both the distinction between what we're doing here with the philanthropic leadership doctorate versus more traditional PhD programs, and also the importance of the applied research project as compared to a dissertation.
Exactly. It's an applied research project. So it actually begins even before somebody is accepted as a student. It's part of the application process. Part of the way we evaluate whether somebody is a good candidate for the program is we ask them to articulate an applied research project that they would propose to gather research on and kind of go through the program with, refined continually through every course that they take over 2 years, and then spend the 3rd and final year of the program fully developing this project and presenting it to communities with whom they're going to begin implementing it. So there are other kinds of professional doctorates in other fields, and they call this sometimes a dissertation in practice, because you're not adding to completely new knowledge, you're not adding a marginal new piece of territory, illuminating new territory. You're actually developing a project that is based on applied research, already something that you have been immersed in through your practical experience, and then propose in a very academically rigorous and justified way, showing that you've done the research to show that the research supports what you're trying to do. You've looked at other attempts, and you have cited it so that your project is now going to be part of the knowledge ecosystem going forward, and then you start applying it. So it really is a different kind of a model that explicitly connects kind of your prior knowledge to research and then an application process. For example, we have a community college president who already has a doctorate, who is going to be working on a project that seeks to identify best practices for attracting more philanthropy to community colleges, which is a very worthwhile project because, as you know, most Americans experience higher education through community colleges, and yet until very recently, and they still do not get anywhere close to the amount of philanthropy compared to some institutions that only educate a very, very small sliver of the American population. So that just gives you one example of the kinds of projects that our students are working on.
Well, and it's so important when we think about the emphasis we're now placing on creating greater impact. Everyone wants to see nonprofits have a bigger impact using their methods and the work that they do. But I think that starts with researching existing solutions and then finding ways that these solutions can be applied to our organizational context so that we can get that impact. And maybe this program is going to create a movement around that. What do you think here?
That would be wonderful. And this is this is something that I'm biased with because universities are at the center of the ecosystem of knowledge production and preservation. And knowledge is a very complicated thing in many ways. It has many different aspects to it. What we learn, how we use it in different contexts, what we know instinctively, what we know at a deeper level. So it's very difficult to. It's not difficult. You can make all kinds of broad, sweeping statements about these things, but it takes some sophistication to think about what is it that I know, what is it that you know, how do we bring those two things together, and then how do we bring more people into the orbit of common knowledge and improving knowledge to move ourselves forward. But yes, we think we're hopefully part of such a movement. We're making some contribution to making sure that the knowledge of these leaders is connected to a system, help them refine what their impact that they're trying to achieve. So collectively, that is something I think that you are helping us achieve in this program. But you can think about one person coming in and having a research project where they would like to kind of further specify what such a movement might look like, And so it's different ways people can use what we are kind of collectively created based on, this is not based something that came out of our minds overnight. This is really, I think, where a lot of the scholarship and the people who have been thinking systematically, both inside the academy and adjacent to it, in a variety of associations and organizations devoted to sharing knowledge like your own, I think it's something of a coalescence, and there's just, fortunately now, there has been some momentum to create an institutional locus so that we don't lose some of this wisdom.
Well, I think about how things have evolved during my 40 years or so of work, and particularly with nonprofit organizations and educational programs. These used to be sort of appendages to business schools, but now we see more formal programs focused on nonprofit management and leadership. What have you seen over the last 20 or so years, I'll say, that has given you hope about the skill sets and training that we're able to give people now in the various programs that we see?
I think that's a great question, because I began my career in the academy. So, the academy has a discipline and a rigor, and they use methods, and if your knowledge and what you're doing doesn't necessarily fit into the established method, we sometimes have a hard time incorporating it. And there are two different cultures: the cultures of inquiry and the culture of practice. And I've been on both sides. When I was a fundraiser for universities, I would look at some of the research and I would say, I really don't see how this is going to really help me at all. The questions they're asking are perhaps interesting questions in an abstraction, but they're not connected to what's really keeping me up at night, And so as I kept going in and out of practice in the academy, I saw the need that we need more people who are explicitly building those bridges. And it's not just an occasional bridge that you can build and just put it down there and use it when you want to. You need kind of bridge builders, bridge maintainers, people whose career is really all about building those bridges and maintaining them, because they don't just exist on their own. Because the cultures of, I got to get my budget met and my board satisfied in the next 6 months versus I've got this wonderful research topic that I think, in 5 years is going to show some marginal insight. Those two worlds, unless you do something explicit to tie them together, will continue to march on their own separately and will not provide the kind of cross-pollination and support for each other that they really need. So I think that's why I was so excited to join the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. It had from the beginning that as its mission. Even the faculty that I saw who were brilliant, who could have gone to other kind of conventional disciplines, they were fascinated by the interdisciplinary nature of things, first of all, because our problems are not amenable to be solved by one particular discipline. You can't say, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm only going to look at it at this angle, or I'm a sociologist and an economist. You've got to be able to tie those things together. Those were all the problems are finding solutions is going to be across disciplines. So that's where our faculty was excited, and they didn't want to build a new field and an ivory tower that was disconnected from everything. So that's what got me so excited. And so we have continued to build on that initial insight, the initial need. And the PhilD, the Professional Doctorate in Philanthropic Leadership, is just the latest kind of culmination of that bridge building exercise that we think is so important for our field, and why we think we exist to support it in that way.
I think it's so great that you pointed out the importance of bridging the academic world with the practical world within academia. I'm sure that's not easily done. So kudos to the Lilly Family School for accomplishing that. But I also wanted to point out just how impressed I am with the diversity of students that we have in the PhilD program. We have students from all over the world, different age groups, different orientations, different religions. It's quite amazing, actually, that we've been able to achieve this. And, we even have what we call an asynchronous program, which is tough to do from my standpoint, but we're going to make it work. But we also try to have synchronous sessions, but it's difficult to do because we have people on different time zones, halfway around the world even in some cases. And we have to schedule around that just so that we can get folk together. But it's still very powerful that we have this great diversity.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful observation, Art, because the greater the diversity of backgrounds, experiences, the broader our field of learning becomes. And we think of philanthropy as part of the human condition. That's something that we have had from our very basic forms of social organization to our most sophisticated ones in our big economies, where people have large foundations and experimenting with social enterprise and impact investing. But it happens everywhere, and we have so much to learn from each other. And that's what we try to do when we put together a class, is making sure that the cohort itself is a field of learning. They learn from each other, and as you have experienced, we are going along with them. The program is formally asynchronous, but they want to be together, and given our size and our nimbleness, we work with wonderful faculty like yourselves to make those synchronous experiences possible online. And as you saw earlier this week when we brought the second cohort in for their residency, so at the beginning of the online program, there's a required 3D residency. The original cohort, the first cohort, decided they wanted to see themselves, each other in person again, plus they wanted to meet the second cohort. So on their own, they decided and convinced us that they're going to come. And so the first cohort had a second, not required residency, just out of pure enthusiasm and interest, and they joined the second cohort. And so, that's what we also like to do, and that's why our small scale, our family feel, and the people we bring in, we do these organic things to meet our community where they need to go, rather than creating these processes that then become rigid and unmovable.
Well, Amir, I want to just thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Art.
This has been eye-opening, I'm sure, for many people who don't know much about all of the things going on at the Lilly School. Many people are probably familiar with the Giving USA work, of course, but the academic programs and how practical they are, many people aren't necessarily aware of. So I'm glad we had a chance to share that. But I also want to just thank you for the work that you're doing there, the groundbreaking work that you're doing, and that you also are coming after some great leaders too. Some of my friends like Patrick Rooney and, of course, Gene Temple.
Patrick Rooney, Gene Temple.
Gene has been a lifelong friend in the nonprofit sector to me and someone that I've always looked up to. And here you are sitting in his chair. How wonderful is that? Now, to all of you who are listening to this podcast for the first time, we are a weekly show, and this is actually our 202nd consecutive week that we've done this. And if you're listening for the first time, I would really be gratified if you would subscribe to the show. You can find us via audio on any major podcast platform, and I hope you subscribe. And this video portion can be found on our YouTube channel. That's the YouTube channel for the BBB Wise Giving Alliance. So I hope you'll subscribe and stay tuned to all of our future shows. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you back here next week.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.